I'm taking this course to do my health information management program.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so who else do we have here? We have Christina. Can you hear me?
Yep, hi.
Hello. Okay, so kind of a low turnout at the moment, but we did say we would get started at 1, so we can go ahead and get going. So I'm Rebecca. I guess usually I'm not, and I am recording this, so I will post it later on. So my name is Rebecca, and I will just show my camera here for a minute just to say hi. Hello, I'm here in my office in Truro. I usually have an office mate, but she's ran away. I guess she doesn't want to listen to me talking to myself here in the office. So normally I'm probably going to leave the video option off just because it makes the document really large when I'm trying to upload it like to YouTube or online. So it makes it take forever to upload. So usually we will leave video off, and so you guys can also leave video off. Unless there's something you desperately wanted to show me on your camera, then we'll probably mostly just use the mic or that little option down there to the left. So you could go ahead and turn on that chat box if you like, because some people will probably communicate over on the sideline there. So this is our first Biology 1047 Skype class, and I'm excited to get going. As I've mentioned a few times online, I love biology, and I just think it's so cool how the human body works. So I am a bit of a nerd when it comes to that stuff. So for this class, or this Skype session, and if you're not familiar with Skype, I think most people that are taking this course have usually taken another one online and have used Skype, but if not, those buttons along the bottom are what to be aware of. So on the far left, the one that opens up the chat box, then you have to turn on and off your video button, and then the next one is a little microphone. So if you want to ask something with a microphone, you can make sure you click that so that it doesn't have a line through it so that you can talk to me. And the next one is to turn on your video, and the last one is to hang up. So if there are a couple other options over there, like call options. So if you find your headset or your speakers aren't working or your microphone's not working, you may be able to change the device under call options. Okay, so this is really like a welcome and an overview. If you have not participated in an online class before, maybe give me a little emoji over on the side in the chat there, or use your microphone to tell me. And if you have, you can also tell me. So if you've participated in a class or if you have not, could you write over on the side for me? Or unmute your mic. Awesome. It seems like I'm assuming most of you probably have. If you've just joined, you can press that little bubble down in the bottom left hand of your screen to turn on the chat function so that you can see what other people are typing. All right, so I'm going to just kind of switch over from the PowerPoints here into showing you my desktop so we can take a peek at Brightspace. And if I call it D2L, I apologize. If you've been online for a bit, you know that it changed from being called D2L to Brightspace. So when I say either thing, I'm talking about the same thing. So I'm just going to move to show you my monitor here. I won't be able to see chat just for a couple of moments while I'm doing this, but okay, can you guys see my screen now, showing Brightspace in the biology course? Yes? Okay, great. So when you first open up Brightspace and you come on to this course, so you can find your courses, generally they call this guy up here in the top a waffle, so you can scroll through and find your Biology 2 course. And here in the announcements I will post some important things. So like yesterday I posted a reminder to participate in the Skype discussion. And for those of you that weren't able to make it today, I will post it as a recording, and you'll just have to answer a question in order to get the point for participation. I also had a little welcome message here that takes you through some of these basics, so I did a video showing my face. So I think all of you that are participating at the moment have been involved in our welcome unit. So when you first open up content, there's this whole unit called welcome. So you're going to find your course outline, meet your facilitator, so that's me. There's a scavenger hunt quiz, so that's not for points, but it's to show you, kind of point out some important things that you may want to be aware of in your course outline. Welcoming to Mastering Biology, so that's where we'll do a lot of our assignments. And if you cannot get into that, let me know, and we will see what we can do to get that opened up for you. But if you just did Biology 1046, you're probably ready to go in that. And quite a few of you have already participated in our first discussion post. So this is really kind of introducing yourself to the class, and that is also for a point. So if you haven't done that yet, make sure you do. It is due, or make sure you do it. Yeah, it's due on June 14th. Do you have any questions so far about what you find in the welcome unit? And you can ask a question by typing over on the left, or you can unmute your mic to ask a question. All right, so I've opened up. Go ahead and ask questions, even if I'm talking. Don't worry about it. So I've opened up our course outline. So hopefully most of you have had a chance to look through this so far. So in there you'll find how things are graded in this course. So almost half is going to be your 3 proctored tests. So make sure you have arranged to do your test on site with a proctor. So I think most of you are going to an NSCC campus that you live nearby. If you are not near an NSCC campus, then you need to fill out a proctoring exam application, and that has to come to me. So if you are not going to an NSCC campus, make sure you contact me. These Skype sessions are each 1%, so participating. And we also have a couple of labs. Your Mastering Biology assignments are 15%. Discussions, so if you've already participated in your discussion, I've already graded that first one, and it will be released a little bit later, the grades. Christine is asking, in 1046, all Mastering Biology assignments were provided right away. Only chapter 13, 21 are at the moment. Well, I can do that all right away. I think when I filled it out, I just kind of did it at the start of the unit, but a few of them are released early, but I can make them released early. Is that what you would prefer? It's not a problem for me to go in and change some dates for when you're able to see them. Yeah, okay, sure, Christina. I can definitely go ahead and make the dates open. I think all of the other unit materials open early, so it makes sense that those are open early as well. Thank you for asking. Um, okay, so important dates are in your work plan. So I like to have a calendar right in front of me where I can see when things are due and when the tests are, and it helps for me as an instructor, but it will also help you guys, for the learners, to visualize how you have to spend your time. If you've done a fast-tracked class before, it is a lot of information in a fairly short amount of time, so you really need to be dialed in. You need to, come log in really almost every day, if not every day. Make sure you're on top of assignments and when things are due, because it's going to be a lot of information in a fairly short amount of time. I've also added Skype class dates if you're wanting to participate in real time in the work plan. So that's something else you can also plan for. I think most of them, or actually all of them, are on Tuesdays. And I'm also available if something is really tricky for you and you would like a one-on-one Skype session, or you feel like there's an extra one needed. I'm open to that too. So just let me know if something could really benefit your learning, and we'll try to accommodate that. All right. Any questions about proctoring tests or any other assignments, just feel free to grab the mic or write something in the messenger over on the left-hand side, okay? All right. What else did we want to review here? Okay, so after welcome unit, since that's a fairly quick thing and hoping everything is tied up in that on the 14th, the first unit you're going to be starting hopefully soon in the next few days is Unit 1, which is structure and function, but it also has a piece on evolution in it, and evolution will also be addressed a second time way down in Unit 7. So that's the last week of the course. You'll also do a piece on evolution. So it's kind of tied into the front and the back end of the course. I know a few of you that you found that topic interesting, so hopefully you get something out of it then. So a good place to start on any of the units, it always has a what to do. If you click on that, it will bring up exactly what activities you should be doing in order to complete your unit. So it may be set up similar to Biology 1046 if you did that online in Fast Track. But it'll tell you like activity, read chapter 13, the pages, chapter 14, the pages, doing your assignment on mastering biology. And then the assignment for that unit is also a discussion similar to what the assignment was for this unit. And then next it's on to chapter, so that's going over evolution, and then we're on to chapter 21, which is a structure and function, or kind of like the basics of anatomy and physiology. So that's always a good place to start when you're first going into a unit. I know when I'm doing an online course, I like to go piece by piece, and I just finish one section, move on to the next, finish one, move on to the next. So at the end of this course, there's one kind of bigger assignment. So it's something to keep in mind as you're working through. So there is a final essay, and it's going to tie in some of these other self-assessments or discussion pieces that you've done throughout the course. So it is something to keep in mind. Maybe it's something you want to work on starting from the beginning, but it's under portfolio final essay, and it explains exactly what is involved. So like 1 to 2 pages in length as a Word document. If a Word document is really painful for you and you don't want to do it that way, then we can definitely discuss something like a video or audio might be all right as well. So I'm open to that. Okay, any questions or anything about D2L or how it's set up, or if you can't find something or can't get into something, then please ask. All right, I'm going to bring the PowerPoint back up. I'll just have a drink of tea while I wait. Does anyone else drink tea while they do online Skype? Oh yes, tea is the best. I think right now I'm having a coconut chai, which is good. Okay, so we're done that. Let's move through here. So I thought I might go over a little bit this starting point of Unit 1, so talking a bit about evolution since your assignment is involves that part of it, the discussion. Plus there's also some mastering biology stuff on evolution, so I thought we'd start by going over some of that. If you want to ask any questions, please feel free to interrupt as I go or write something off to the left. So chapter 13, so on D2L it gives the exact pages that you're going to want to look at for this one. And it talks about kind of how our theory of evolution came to be, what it kind of looks like today, how they think evolution worked. So that's explaining how natural selection is the big piece there. If you want to have your textbook in front of you, I will ask a few questions as we go through. So if you haven't had a chance to look at chapter 13 yet, you could open it up and we can kind of follow along if you like. And just by looking through your textbook, you'll be starting to study technically. Some of that stuff will stick in your memory as we talk about it during this class. So this is just chapter objectives for 21. So we'll just start with chapter 13, and I think probably we'll do chapter 21. Yeah, sure, grab your textbook if you have it there. Chapter 21 we will probably go over next Tuesday on the 19th. So evolution is, like I said, meeting the objective for this course in learning about evolution. So it's not likely to pop up too heavily on a test. We're meeting this learning objective by the discussion we're doing in Unit 1 and also that final essay. So as far as being tested on Chapter 13, it's not going to be a huge focus. So out of Unit 1, focusing more on Chapter 21 for studying for your test is a better bet. So your chapter starts off with this picture of this cute little baby deer, and it's talking about how evolution might look today. So I know when I plant a garden, there's a high probability that deer are going to come eat things in my yard. And there's a high probability if I leave a bag of garbage outside, not in a garbage bin, that the skunk that lives under my shed is going to come and rip the garbage bags apart. And I know some of my neighbors, and maybe some of you have seen raccoons eating out of compost bins, or bears even. I know I live in a fairly rural area, and bears are pretty common in compost bins. So there are lots of ways that animals are evolving and adapting to live in and amongst humans. So I think, are both of you in Halifax? Both of you that are here participating? Yeah, deer ate all of my tomatoes. Deer just think gardens are their own personal salad bars, I think, don't they? So that is one way that species are still evolving and adapting, because as humans take up more and more space, animals have to survive in these new environments that include things that weren't there, even several hundred years ago. Those things weren't there. Okay, so the idea of a fixed species. So many hundreds of years ago, it was mostly accepted that um, life started at a certain fixed point. So some of it's like Christian or Judeo-Christian culture where they take that interpretation of Genesis in the Bible as being literally on those at that time. All manner of life was created all at once, and that those lives continued unchanged until today. So that is still something that is up for debate. Uh, Something we're probably not going to get too heavily into debating in this course, but that's kind of the idea of that, animals and creatures were all created at once. So there are different things that have happened over time that show that that may not have been the way the way that it happened. So one reason for this, or a discovery that happened that kind of showed, oh, maybe there are a lot of species that existed at one point that no longer exist today, or that were kind of similar to species that are today, but are really different. So finding fossils was one way that it was kind of like a tricky thing. They would find these interesting animals and wonder, like in your book it shows it's a type of shellfish, but they used to call it a snake stone because the closest animal they could think it looked like was a snake, but they couldn't figure out why it didn't have a head on it, right? And so this picture here is an example of a certain marine reptile that existed at one point but no longer existed. So these are some things that raise some big question marks for them. So if these things existed then, why don't they now? So it was that idea of things becoming extinct for whatever reason. So Darwin is our main guy when it comes to this theory of animals and species and plants evolving over time. So he was always interested in animals and diversity, and he was really fascinated with nature. And he, at one point, took advantage of being able to go on a voyage when he was in his early 20s. And as he went around the world, he realized that when he went in different places, there were always different groups of animals. And some of them may look similar to other continents or other countries. Some of them may look exactly the same, but they had similarities but differences. So depending on how close they were to the equator. Your book gives an interesting example of these two turtles. So the one on the left is a type of tortoise that he's evolved into living in a place where there's a lot of vegetation on the ground. So he doesn't have to move very fast or be able to reach anywhere, because wherever he's crawling around in the ground, he's going to be able to eat vegetation like plants and grasses and things. Whereas the turtle on the right, his shell kind of curves upward near his neck so that he's able to reach up high. So he would live in an area that doesn't have as much vegetation, so it could be really dry, and he may need to reach up higher to get leaves off of bushes and trees and things. So it's an example of two animals that were similar but different in a lot of ways. And two animals that are like that show that they've grown up in populations that are probably separate and in different areas, but because they're so similar, they probably came from a similar ancestor back in time. So evolution is not something that happens quickly. It's something that's over a very, very long period of time. So part of Darwin's theory is that species that exist today came from ancestral species. So another type of species that is similar but different from far back in the past. And so he also proposed how that happened. So if you're keen on page 247, it does talk about how he feels that life evolves. Let me bring up, I know there's only a couple of you here, but a question, so an example of a question that could be, so according to Darwin, blank is the mechanism of evolution. So if you can click one of these things, so is evolution the mechanism of evolution, natural selection, death, or homologies? Can you guys see the question? Are you able to click on one? Great, I can see your answer, Christina. Thank you. So I think I can show you the results there. So you both picked natural selection, which is absolutely correct. Let me switch back here. Hopefully my PowerPoint doesn't go back to the start, but it might. No, it didn't. Okay, so yeah, so natural selection is the mechanism of evolution. So that's actually how evolution happens. And so the way that is described is that individuals, so say that turtle, for example, that can reach to higher branches, so ones that have certain traits that they inherited are more likely to survive. So over time, the ancestors of that turtle that can reach up, some of them may have had certain genetic flukes that made their necks a bit longer, made their shells in such a shape that they could reach higher. So those turtles had a better chance of surviving, so they had a better chance of passing on their DNA, so that over a very long period of time, more and more turtles had the shell shape that allowed them to reach higher. So if they're able to get more food, they're going to be able to survive better in that environment. So that's what natural selection is. If you have certain traits that make you more likely to survive and reproduce, then that will evolve into a trait that most in your species will have over a long period of time. So evidence of evolution. So evidence that kind of that says that this theory of evolution is probably correct in how it works comes from fossils. So when paleontologists study or find fossils, they can see within those fossils that there are certain structures like bones. For example, like this researcher up in the top right hand of the slide, he's finding a bone that's found in sedimentary rock. And so by looking at that bone, you know that that species of animal probably doesn't exist today, but it does look very similar to like a long bone in the leg of a human, for example, or in other species. So there are similarities there that are occurring. And there are other examples there too of how fossils are formed. So some are an imprint, like the footprints in the lower left-hand corner. Some are actually full bodies that are preserved, like the mosquito in the center. So if you've ever watched Jurassic Park, that's someday how we'll recreate dinosaurs, right? So homologies, so that is the next kind of line of evidence, and I already alluded to that in the picture of the long bone in the upper right of the last slide. But so it means that organisms that were found in the past have similar structures or similarities that continue on to today. So even though we are completely different in many ways, there are certain things that are going to be the same. So homologous structures is one of them. And on page 251 in your book, there's an example. I might have it here on the slide too anyway, of these long bones. So this long bone in our arm, the radial bone, is very similar to this longer bone in the cat's leg. And it's also similar, although changed some, in the whale and also in the bat. So those are homologous structures. So it shows that we descended from a similar animal if you go back far enough, but there's some modifications that are happening based on where the needs of that organism. So molecular homologies. So this means that because fairly recently we can study what DNA is and what's actually making up those molecules, the very kind of blueprint of life, we can now see that DNA across organisms has a lot of similarities. And some DNA might be closer related, like a human DNA we can actually study is closer related to chimpanzee, for example, than we would be related to a snail. So there's one other type of structure, and this is one that's brought up. I'm just trying to see where it is in your textbook exactly. Oh yes, on 251. So there's one other type of structure that can show that we may come from common ancestors. Let me bring up a question here. Sometimes people think of this one as a common one that people bring up is the appendix, for example. So structures in an organism that are left over from their ancestors but have no current importance. So I see one of you have clicked. If the other one would like to choose an answer, if you can find it. And you're right, these are called vestigial structures. So these are structures that one species may still have, but it doesn't have the same function that it would have had in the past. So an example that is commonly used is the appendix. So it's not quite useless in a human, which we'll get to in the digestive system. It's not completely useless, but the appendix had a lot bigger role to play in some other species of animal. But for whatever reason, as humans evolved, it became a structure that wasn't as necessary for our survival, so it's got smaller and smaller and less obvious use. An example your textbook gives is actually that a whale has tiny pelvic bones and hind leg bones that are no longer used, so they're considered vestigial structures. But it shows that in the past, ancestors of the whale probably had a use for that pelvis and hind leg bones, so they probably did have legs and maybe were able to walk on land, whereas the whale evolved to not need that in order to survive. So those structures are now smaller and considered vestigial. This is just a picture of, showing commonalities in DNA between some species. And this is a picture actually of the opening to the appendix. So if you were to go to near the start of your large intestine, this is what it might look like with a scope. And the other evidence for evolution actually goes back to our embryos. So it's always interesting to me to see comparison pictures of embryos because it's shocking how much, for example, on this page, a chicken embryo looks so similar to a human embryo actually. So we start off looking very much the same, but then as we grow, structures obviously change some, but that similarity in how we look at this stage in life shows that we probably came from similar ancestors if you go back far enough. Okay, so on 252 in your text, this just gives an example of like an evolutionary tree. So these are all considered four-limbed animals or tetrapods. And it shows that ostriches and hawks and other birds, for example, they have a common feature of feathers. So they are probably more closely related than crocodiles, for example. And crocodiles and lizards are more closely related than other mammals. And part of it shows what that ancestor had in common. So amnion, which is showing between levels 2 and 3. So all of those animals on level 3 and up have in common that they have an amnio sac that would encase the young at some point. So in a mammal that happens in utero, or in the other animals there it would happen inside an egg. But there's some kind of protective covering over top of an embryo. And the kind of last point in this, yes it is, okay, is the fact that populations are kind of the unit of evolution. So a population is like a group of individuals of the same species that live in the same area and interbreed. So an example of that could be the turtle. So for example, in the Galapagos Islands, though that is a population of turtles that are living together, living in the same kind of weather and climate conditions, and they breed with one another. So it's that type of situation where a population will together evolve over time. And I think your textbook gives this picture as an example of some lakes in Alaska that are fairly isolated. So if you go there, you can find populations of individuals that may appear very different from species that are similar, but they evolve in such a way that they're going to look very different over time. So don't worry about, so a table like this, you wouldn't need to memorize any of these things, but it just kind of shows what happens over time. So if you go back far enough, we can see where we found the oldest kind of fossils that we know of so far today, and how things evolved as time went on. So origin of most living animals, for example, for as far as we can tell, about 542 million years ago. And then algae evolved. And then we developed plants that were able to grow on the land and use sun and water. And then fish and amphibians and insects. And then all the way up to humans, which were a fairly recent kind of evolutionary thing. So do you guys have any questions on chapter 13 or on, so I will get that code for the textbook to you, Pratibha, and any questions on bright space as well? You guys okay with navigating it? Let me just check the page numbers there. So I know chapter 14, that last, this last table I've showed you here, that is from chapter 14. So there are pieces of that. If there is anything, I didn't plan on going over it in Skype necessarily. It's not very many pages, but if there's anything that comes up, please ask in the question and answers on D2L, and I will definitely answer anything there. And if you feel like there's parts of it that should be gone over, we can do that on the 19th as well. And there are a few questions on your mastering biology too in it, so if anything's not clear, then we can go over it. Reading to page 259, are we supposed to read the last part? Let's just take a peek. I don't remember the exact page numbers, so I'll just take a peek at D2L here. So Unit 1 page numbers. So Chapter 13, 242 to 259. Yep, no, that's it for this one. And then Chapter 14, 278 and 282. Sorry, yeah, I was just comparing to your message there. So those are the page numbers for this unit. All right. All right, so thank you guys for joining today. And if you have any questions, please email or primarily use that question and answer discussion board on D2L, because if you have a question about something, then probably someone else has the same question too. So it's nice to help out others when we can. All right, so if there are no more questions, I will allow you guys to sign off, and I will see you next Tuesday.